Hello, YouTube. I want to talk further about the revolutions that are sweeping across much of the world, really, from Tunisia to Yemen to Bahrain, to Egypt to the UK to Madison, Wisconsin, here in the US. The list goes on and on. Now, I want to first address a theory that has been propagated by Alex Jones and similar individuals, individuals with similar outlooks. And that is the theory that these revolutions are all engineered by the globalists, quote unquote. That the quote unquote New World Order is engineering all these crises, that they, I don't know where the logic, where the reasoning extends exactly. Like, if you ask these people some questions, I mean, certainly they don't think, unless they're completely out of touch with reality, they don't think that all these individual protesters, the hundreds of thousands, the millions in Egypt, are all CIA operatives. That's just, even too asinine for people who think every single thing is a conspiracy. But they do think that there are CIA operatives, apparently, or MI6 operatives, insert intelligence agency here, operatives who are sparking these crises. And what's striking is that not only do they propagate these theories, but they don't even suggest that there's a variety of factors. It's not as if Alex Jones on Infowars.com is publishing articles that say, well, this may, X, Y, and Z may indicate that there is a quote-unquote globalist influence here that's trying to steer the revolutions in X, Y, or Z direction. But certainly there's also the fact that the people are starving and fed up with their dictators and rioting. No, it's virtually unmentioned on Infowars, from what I've seen on similar conspiracy-minded websites, that the people might just be pissed off that they're starving and they're dictated, and that they're being and that they have been oppressed for decades by ruthless tyrants. So they're not. Alex Jones, he's a mixed bag. I support a lot of what he does. I feel that he's been instrumental in getting the truth out about 9/11, as well as issues such as police brutality. But he tends to hyperbolize and tends to view everything as a conspiracy, which I don't support. Just as I don't support thinking there's no such thing as conspiracies. Both ends of the spectrum are highly flawed. So yeah, he's not giving credit to these individuals who are rising up in mass, organizing rather spontaneously, at least somewhat non-hierarchically, and attempting to better their lives and to install a better, more humane regime. I would support no regime. I tend towards anarchism. But, these individuals are fighting for a better life, and you have to give them credit. Now, as for the justifications, as for the reasons that have been given as to why Jones and others view these revolutions as contrived, globalist, engineered crises, there has not been a lot in the way of evidence. One thing that's been brought up is that the April 6th movement, which was one of the primary, or at least a significant organizer in the Egypt uprisings, were financed or at least supported by the U.S. State Department to attend a seminar that is run by an organization called movements.org, which is an umbrella organization that brings together non-governmental organizations, non-profits, and multinational corporations, and it lists as one of its partners the U.S. State Department. So the U.S. State Department paid, or the article wasn't clear. In the Washington Post, I believe it was, the U.S. State Department supported in some way and encouraged these Egyptian activists looking to overthrow the government to attend a conference put on by this umbrella organization, which is an amalgamation of corporations, NGOs, activist groups, and is partnered with the U.S. State Department. Suspicious, perhaps, but certainly not sufficient evidence to say that the revolution in Cairo was engineered. There are other potential explanations for this partnering and support. One of which is they want to control, the U.S. State Department is seeking to control the outcome of the revolution, which, to the extent it's possible, I don't really have a hard time believing. Certainly the U.S. wants to use any crisis to their advantage and will attempt to do so. So, perhaps they're attempting to control the direction and manage it so that the fallout is not as bad, so that Egypt doesn't end up with someone who's hostile to the U.S., so that they can attempt to get someone who's maybe at least somewhat subservient to U.S. interests in power. Maybe they just want to surveil the conference and surveil these activists to make sure that they, again, aren't going to undermine imperialism in any significant sense. I suppose it's possible, too, that it was some rogue State Department group that actually supported the activists, or maybe they wanted to use it to put a humanitarian face on the U.S. government. Those latter few examples seem unlikely, but the point is we don't know, and to speculate and turn that speculation into this is definitely financed by the globalists seems to me a bit ridiculous. Is it possible that the CIA wanted this uprising because Mubarak had become defiant and they wanted to install a puppet, so they sparked the already existing rage amongst the Egyptian citizenry with operatives on the ground and helped to overthrow him? It's possible. I don't dismiss it. I just haven't seen nearly enough evidence, whereas we have seen evidence that the Egyptians wanted freedom and that was a huge motivating factor, that they were starving, large sectors of the populace were unemployed and they wanted freedom, and that was a fundamental reason that they revolted. So, I'm a skeptic. I don't dismiss anything offhand, but I just don't see nearly enough evidence to support the Alex Jones and other conspiracy-minded folk in their claim that this is entirely globalist contrived, and not just Egypt, but they're saying that all these revolutions around Europe are globally contrived. They're saying that the globalists contrived them in order to, destroy the sovereignty of all these nations and accelerate the push towards a one-world government. Now, with all these governments gone, they can consolidate power more easily. So the theory goes. Webster Tarpley is parroting this as well, or is espousing this belief as well. So, yeah, it's possible, but I don't see sufficient evidence now. It seems to me that, these are millions of people that, yes, the globalists are powerful, but short of annihilating vast swaths, murdering vast swaths of people, I don't see how they can control the outcome of all these revolutions with all these millions of people. Certainly they can influence, but are they going to risk the installation of regimes that are much more hostile to U.S. interests, much more nationalistic, arising from these revolutions? Are they going to spark these revolutions and then risk an outcome that is antithetical to their desires, to the desires of the ruthless Anglo-American establishment? I just don't see that as likely. So yeah, there are legitimate resistance movements. Everything is not a conspiracy. Um, but look into it yourself and see if you view these claims as justified or not. Let's see, what else? So Libya currently, apparently Gaddafi's forces are pushing back. I have slightly more mixed feelings with Libya than I do with Egypt. Certainly Gaddafi is a tyrant. The fact that the U.S. media, the propagandizing U.S. media, and hypocritical, murderous U.S. government say that Gaddafi is a tyrant does not make him any less of a tyrant. The extent to which he personally is autonomous is certainly up for debate, and certainly we shouldn't allow the U.S. government to use to use Gaddafi's cruelty to justify a highly hypocritical military intervention, which would be for control of resources by the United States and multinational corporations. Certainly, the situation doesn't justify anything of the sort, but by the same token, we can't just say because the U.S. government is evil and because they're calling him Gaddafi a tyrant, he's not a tyrant. That logic doesn't follow. You have to evaluate his actions, and his actions indicate, or the actions of his regime, because as I say, the extent to which he is autonomous is largely in question, are horrific. Over the past 40 years, in terms of, yes, there have been some reforms, but we still have a situation in which protests are illegal. They are now going on in mass, uncontrolled, but they are illegal and often repressed. Journalists are imprisoned. People who speak freely are imprisoned. There is no free press to speak of in Libya. The judiciary system is highly unjust. Torture is commonplace. Detainings without trial are commonplace. Of course, then again, they're now legal in the good old U.S. But it's a horrific regime and should not be apologized for. So I wish the people the best of luck. But there is the caveat that Gaddafi, as mentioned in my previous video, is somewhat hostile to U.S. interests, which is good. So hopefully he won't be replaced with a puppet. But what it looks like right now is happening is the country is being split up. Hopefully there won't be a bloodbath in which one side takes the other over, i.e. the Gaddafi forces massacring vast swaths of the opposition to retake the portions of the country that have thus been liberated. Hopefully that does not occur. Madison, Wisconsin, I think it's fantastic. I think it's very unfortunate that they passed the Democratic senators were gone and the Republicans passed this collective bargaining denial. They denied the union's collective bargaining, which is awful and is a trend we may see spreading throughout. Capitalism is unsustainable, the market economy is unsustainable, the system is unsustainable, but because they want to perpetuate it and have no problem continuing to make large corporations have no problem continuing to turn in record profits as the working class suffers, and because the military-industrial complex is not willing to cut down on their budget, things like education, things like union rights, things like homeless rights have to suffer. So I encourage people to resist. Now, these massive riots that are sweeping the world are fantastic in that injustice is rampant and people are resisting, but crisis presents an opportunity both for those forces of good and forces of evil, to put it in those George Bush-esque